So what I'm going to get to now is talking a little bit about actually sort of aiming towards that first question that was asked about what if the child doesn't feel like they've sinned, and the basic idea of this little section is about how do we form our children to understand sin, mercy, and the sacrament of confession. Of course, a lot of that formation we've been doing already. We've been trying to do here at church in class, but you've also been doing this, for your child's entire life, whether you know it or not, is forming their understanding. And so I think it's helpful to talk for just a minute about what generally kids at this age level, what they understand and how they think about right and wrong. Now, obviously, if I make any specific statement, it's not going to apply to every child. So like every child is different. Every child is a little bit different, on all this. But developmentally, there are certain things that this age group is generally getting, right? The first thing is that they generally are starting to develop an intuition or have been developing an intuition about what's right and wrong, right? If they didn't long before this, they're starting to get some kind of inborn sense that some things, when they do them, they feel bad afterwards, and they know they shouldn't do them. And some things they do, they feel good, and they think it was great that they did it. Now, the important thing, obviously, to understand is that they're not always correct about these things, which I think goes to that first question. What if they don't feel like they have sinned? That at this age, actually like at every age, that intuition is not always right. So it's something that's developing, but it's not something we can take and tell them is an infallible guide to what's right and wrong, right? I'm going to go back to my children because they're the children that I know the best. My 6-year-old son will reach out and punch one of his siblings, and I'm not sure that he actually feels bad about it afterwards. I'm not sure. He does other things that he definitely feels bad afterwards, but I'm not sure. And the way I try to tell my sisters, I try to tell his sisters, look, I know Gregory is tough, but just try to remember that a 6-year-old boy is training to do two things: hunt and fight wars. That's what boys are naturally learning to do. So he sees everyone around him as like an enemy in some kind of play war. And so if he's punching you or he treats you like the enemy, it's just part of his way of kind of like playing with the world. And not that it excuses punching, but I try to tell them that if he's mean to you and you cry, he's probably just going to want to do it more. So you should probably ignore him. So their sense of right and wrong is not perfect. But what it is a great connection point for discussion. If we can notice those moments, notice those things that our kids sort of naturally feel good or bad about, then we can take those as like entry points to educating them. So if your child does something, let's say goes out of their way to do something nice, something generous, that's a moment that maybe you can ask them, how did it feel to do that? Would you like to do that? Would you like someone else to do that for you? Like, your sister came in and made your bed. Like, how did that feel when she did that? That's a good connection point. And then on the negative side, that intuition, when they do something and they have that moment of feeling that it was wrong. Now, developmentally, it's not always the best to talk to them about that when they're at the height of feeling guilty, because when those emotions are surging. So let's say, one of my daughters, if she does anything she thinks is wrong, she just like bursts into tears immediately. That's not the moment to educate, because physiologically, when you have that emotional reaction, your brain is not really open to learning from it. You learn from those things in retrospect. So if they have a strong emotional reaction, then that's a good opportunity to maybe a little bit later help them look back and reflect on how that felt, right? Um, I never forgotten in my entire life when I was a teenager, um, something I said to my mom. One sort of cruel thing I said to my mom. I think I was 16, and the look on her face. I have literally never forgotten this, and it has for a long time served as a reflection point for me to kind of think about like being careful with the words I use with other people, being kind, speaking kindly with people. We remember those things. So that intuition, that's a great thing that is developing in them that you can use as a way to start to educate them. Second, kids at this age, they really generally are getting a pretty good grasp of rules. Right? That's something that is worked on in school a lot with them. It's something that we as parents, grandparents often have for them. And they've been living with rules for long enough now that they are getting a sense that it's a sort of a list of things you don't want to break these, right? Um, Especially if they are living in an environment where the consequences are fairly clear. Um, so, if you spit on your sister, then you are not playing video games today or tomorrow, right? And if that's consistently enforced, then at this age, they're getting a grasp of how rules work. And that is a good connection point with the Ten Commandments. Again, this list that God gives us in the Old Testament that we use really to reflect on our actions all the time in the church. And so kids at this age, they can get the Ten Commandments. They can get that God said, don't do that, and that. Now they might need some help kind of discerning what each of those means, but the concept of rules is really getting solidified for most kids at this age. The third thing that they are generally understanding is that at this age they generally grasp and accept things that their parents show them or tell them are good, right? So at this age, kids, for the most part, and obviously there are always going to be exceptions, and there's always going to be little things around the edges, but for the most part, kids at this age, they will accept what their parents tell them. They will accept trusted authorities. They will accept what is said by people that their parents obviously trust. So, for example, to go from the rules list of the Ten Commandments, which is all negative things, right? Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, to go to the commands that Jesus gives, which are generally more positive things, right? So things like love your neighbor, love your enemy, pray for those who do wrong to you, feed the hungry, visit the lonely, clothe the naked, right? The greatest commandment that Jesus gives us, do this in memory of me for the Mass. These things children will generally accept and try to practice if they see that they matter to the adults in their lives, especially their immediate guardians, their parents, their grandparents, those people who are close to them. Kids at this age will generally accept those things. They haven't really gotten to a developmental stage where they will try to test or reject things, in an experimental way. They're not going to get to that age until we're doing more like confirmation prep. And right now, they generally will accept those things. So if you want to form your child, then one of the top things you should realize is that what you show them as a priority, they're going to generally latch onto. If there was nothing more important, I remember, well, let me think. There's this kind of stereotype of the dad watching a football game. Maybe some of you lived this, I don't know. The dad watching a football game and somebody interrupts him and he like yells at him and tells him to get out of the room because he's watching the football game. Well, what is that teaching the child? It's teaching the child that a sporting event is more important than being kind to your own child, right? That's what you're showing them. Um, I find that well, I better keep moving because I realize that I can talk a lot longer than we have time for. So right, so those are the things. Those are things that they can generally understand, that they're generally getting a good grasp of. So now the question is, how then do they decide, and do we decide what is right and wrong, what to do at a given time? And there's obviously there's a big keyword for this, something that you already be somewhat familiar with that we're going to talk about for a little bit, which is called conscience, right? What is your conscience? The classic image for people of a certain age, and even those of us who saw this on TV when they were young, is Jiminy Cricket. Classic TV example is Jiminy Cricket in Pinocchio, who follows Pinocchio around, kind of like giving him advice, telling him what to do. Another famous image is the angel and the devil on your shoulders, that they used to do on TV a lot and stuff. Like, person is trying to decide what to do, and they've got a devil on this shoulder telling them, eat the Butterfinger, and the angel on this shoulder telling them, no, eat the salad. And then I just whack the angel off my shoulder and eat the Butterfinger. What conscience is, right, is an interior voice, and this is straight out of Catholic teaching, this is straight out of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, is an interior voice that tells you what is right and wrong, that helps you discern. And believe it or not, the Church teaches that we should, in every situation, follow our consciences. But there is a trick, there's kind of a catch to that. The catch is that our consciences are not always formed very well. Right? So think about I was thinking about this, thinking about conscience and how to understand it. And I think it's helpful maybe to think about other sort of like interior voices that you have. And for me, I think about it in terms of like habits in my life. So when I'm deciding what to eat, what do my interior voices tell me? Well, I struggle with eating junk food, with eating too much food, with drinking too much caffeine. So a lot of the time, my interior voice is telling me, just a couple more Hershey's Kisses are not going to hurt you. You had a really rough day. You should stop on the way home and get a king size Reese's Nutrageous. It'll help you feel better, right? So it's an interior voice that's telling me something, but my mind, when I step back and reflect, knows that I haven't necessarily formed it very well, right? I have taught that voice to tell me to eat junk food when I'm bored or when I am feeling bad or before bed, right? And our consciences are kind of the same way. They get formed by the habits that we take on and by the things that we consume. Not necessarily consume as in physically eat, but the things that we take in form our consciences. Excuse me. Now, the thing we got to face is that there's no question that you are helping, and that you have been their whole life, helping your children form their consciences, form their senses of what is right and wrong. The only question is this: what do you choose to help your child form their conscience? And what do we choose to form our own consciences as well, right? So my child is their sense of right, my children, are their senses of right and wrong being developed just kind of randomly, like based on whatever they see or hear or read or whoever they hang out with? Am I not very careful about that? Or have I been more intentional about what to teach them, what to pass to them, who to let them spend a lot of time with? And what I would encourage you to do for your children's sake, but also for your own sake, is to just be intentional about what is influencing them. And this especially goes for media, especially I think goes for um, tablets and phones and what they're consuming electronically. Um, my daughter is a friend. She tells me it talks about death a lot at school, and it disturbed me a little bit. But we know this girl fairly well, and we know her parents, and so kind of thought about it a little bit and investigated a little more. And I mean, and this one of the things about this particular friend of hers is that she spends a lot of time by herself, and she has unrestricted access to media. So this girl watches a lot of anime, a lot of these Japanese cartoons that are not necessarily appropriate for children. She's filling her mind with violence and death, and so that's what she talks about at school. What we put in is what is going to come out. And this is a lifelong process. So what would I? So I would encourage you to do, and what the church encourages you to do, is be intentional about what is influencing your children and yourself, and to in different ways and to certain extents, try to immerse them in positive things and in what God has taught us in Scripture and the tradition of the church, the teaching of the church. Also, conversation with good, trusted people in their lives. Right? Um, we are formed not only by the media we take in, by the things we read. We're formed by what our parents say is right and wrong. We're formed by the people we hang out with. Um, and if you're not sure about this and you want to teach, you want to show your children what to do and you want to learn what to do yourself, then I would encourage you to pray and to listen, because God will always hear you if you say, God, I don't know what the right thing is to do. I don't know what I should be doing with I don't know what I should be teaching my child. I mean, I pray this stuff all the time. Every time one of my kids does something, um, that seems like a really sad choice. God, what can I do to help this child make better choices? And if you pray and you listen, he will talk to you over time. And I am counting on that so that my 6-year-old isn't in jail when he's 17. No, he's not really that bad. He's actually a very sweet boy. He just is he's super rough and super physical and super wild. But he is actually very sweet.